The Middle East has historically been home to a variety of civilizations, cultures, etc. However, what stands out most is that half of the world follows the faiths that originate from there, which include Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, three Abrahamic faiths. Islam's holiest sites are Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, al-Nabawi, and al-Aqsa, while for the Christians it is the Sepulchre, and for the Jews the Western Wall. However, these faiths have historically clashed over doctrines, history, and more. But moreover, the world has gone through dramatic changes in the past century, as we have witnessed. The sciences, technology, and most importantly, the field of study in history has arisen. Some have set out to just research and publish facts, while others have subscribed to what we now refer to as revisionist school of thoughts, seeking to alter the facts that many others found. Recently, over the decades, there have been an increase of questions regarding the origin of religion itself, moreover their holy sites in particular. The revision-aligned historians have proposed that the city of Mecca in Hijaz was originally in Petra, Jordan, and that the Kaaba was moved and Muslims' Qibla was there. Along with that, there are many arguments made against Mecca being a significant outpost for commerce. Today, we will logically debunk these claims. My objective is to challenge the arguments and not the persons that propose these themselves. Please be respectful in the comment section. So firstly, we have to establish this. Mecca and Petra are completely different from each other. They are completely different. Petra is located in what is now modern Jordan, and its peak it was the center for an Arab kingdom, the Nabateans. Etymology of the name Petra translates to the word rock, and this is Greek, but the biblical name of Petra is Sela. Originally, the Edomites occupied the site in 12,000 BCE, but centuries later, the Arabs came and made it their home. The city thrived due to the spice trade, which you can research on your own. But when those core roots changed, it fell to decline since it relied on trade too much. Mecca, on the other hand, is still standing as an inhabited state, and it is believed Abraham rebuilt the Kaaba after it had been destroyed. Following the passage of both him and Ishmael, the Kaaba slowly was filled with idols based on Islamic tradition, contrary to the concept of monotheism that is exercised today in the Abrahamic faiths. A tribe called Quraysh continued this, and the people of Arabia made pilgrimage in the hundreds to the thousands, while they also profited from trading in Abyssinian and Indian goods north to the other civilizations. Now, the first issue with the claim of Petra being Mecca is reliable accountings and mappings. The claim of Mecca and Petra being related is refuted by the Asatir, known as the Samaritan Book of the Secrets of Moses, and it is a collection of Samaritan biblical legends which draws locally and heavily on oral traditions known among the Jews of the time. Specifically, this work discusses the family of Abraham and mentions Mecca along with the Euphrates in Egypt. However, what is noteworthy is the casual mention of the phrase built Mecca, an admission to Ishmael and Abraham rebuilding that location. Mecca is also referred to as Makkah, and this location of the city is established as being beyond the established civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia. Now, the Greek historian mentions Mecca in his work, the Biblical Bibliotheca Historica. This historian is named Diodorus. You can look him up online. He's a well-renowned historian. On his account, he admits there being a temple revered by all the Arabians of the peninsula, which is interesting because the Kaaba was where all the major tribes came from the peninsula to do pilgrimage. Now, revisionists believe that his statements aren't too true due to geographic descriptions suggesting it is in the northwest, but there is no doubt that this is referring to Mecca. During the times of Diodorus, Ptolemy, etc., the mapping and correct labeling of locations was actually very difficult since they had different methods. There was no modern technology like satellites. Another one of the oldest textual documentations regarding Mecca is the 1st century BC, written by someone named Abd Mecca, and this name is a reference to the sanctity of the holy city. Now, going back to the Asatir, it mentions Mecca as being called Macoraba by Ptolemy. And this is true. During the 2nd century, he listed out several cities in western Arabia. Along with Macoraba, he also listed Al-Hijra, Thema, Yathrib, and Najran, all of which still exist. Then there's the mapping of the cities based off of Ptolemy. As you can see, there's Mecca, and towards its right, there's a listing of another settlement, which is likely modern Taif, thus refuting the claim that Mecca was in Petra. Now, the Encyclopedia of Saudi Arabia also admits Mecca as being Macoraba, confirming the map's validity, which some people question. Then there's the listing of cities by Arminius Marcellinus, who was a Roman, during which he mentions Mecca as being Hierapolis in western Arabia, a variant of the word Geopolis. This is 200 years later, by the way, but still strongly supports Mecca being in the Hijaz, not the Jordan, and it is important to note that cities and locations had changing names at the time. Amanius is further backed by his associate Epiphanius of Salamis, who spoke about the Arabs and their season of Akatal Bayt, which means pilgrimage to the house, which is the house of God. This strongly resembles Mecca and what we now know as the modern Hajj. The text points to it being Petra, but this is clearly a mistake and misclassification, since Petra was a trading post. It is possible that this misclassification stems from the fact that they assume the buildings carved into the rock were a temple. But no, this is simply wrong because the description resembles the Kaaba in Mecca. Later on in the 6th century AD, during the peak of the Byzantine Empire, the ambassador of Justinian I revealed in a report that the Arabs of the peninsula visit a site where they meet, during which there is peace and forbiddance of violence. This is another representation of Mecca and the Quraysh specifically, who welcome the tribes of Arabia from all over, and they don't fight in Mecca because that is prohibited based on the Haram rules. Now, following the rise of the Rashidun Caliphate, there was a written piece called the Syriac Chronicle of Khuzestan, which admitted that the Arabs make pilgrimages there. They accidentally referred to the Kaaba as being the tomb of Abraham, which is totally false. Abraham is not buried there. But what is noteworthy is they highlight the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Adha, a tradition dating to the Arabs' ancestors, Abraham and Ishmael. Now we need to turn the timeline back a little, back to the period of the Ghassanids and their overlords in Istanbul, which at the time was called Constantinople, by the way. The Ghassanids were an Arab kingdom and confederation of tribes following Miaphysite Christianity, and either they held the area of Petra or the Byzantines did. Now, Byzantine policy was to actively persecute those deemed heretics, and this includes what they deemed deviant Christian sects. Realistically, the Kaaba and paganism wouldn't have existed at all under such a scenario. Another issue with Petra being claimed as the origin of Islam is the fact that the early Muslims in such a scenario would have interacted more with the authorities there. Yet there's little mention of this. Also, a key part of Islamic history is the Quraysh, and they controlled the Mecca, not the Ghassanids or Byzantines. The Ghassanids or Byzantines had no control over the Kaaba or any such sorts. We need to consider the year of the elephant as well and King Abraha, an Aksumite king that ruled Yemen and tried to destroy the Kaaba in Mecca in order to elevate his cathedral in Sana'a. It would have taken him weeks to get to Petra with his war elephants, and even if he did, the tribes of the region would have alerted the Byzantines. There's no logical way Abraha would have attacked an area that was not far from Byzantine outposts. Therefore, the Kaaba was not in Petra, it is where it is right now, Mecca. Lastly, we need to examine the economic structure of Mecca itself, since some proponents argue that Mecca couldn't have been a trade post, while Petra was. However, the evidence is contrary. Mecca was a trade post, and the reason for this was not only its location, but the people, as the Arabs could get enslaved from Abyssinia and spices from India to the Byzantines and Persians without any issues. Mecca becoming a trade hub is due to geopolitical circumstances in the region, from piracy on the sea to constant fighting between the superpowers, the Byzantines and Persians. Before the city of Mecca became a trade hub for people, large numbers of ships would sail from Abyssinia and India to Roman Egypt via the ports of Meos, Hormuz, and Berenike. These ports were established in the past by the Egyptians and now had become receiving centers for valuable sought goods. However, this era of trade and ports themselves faded following the collapse of Rome, and this is where Hejaz comes in. Goods would go overland from other places all the way to Constantinople and the Persian cities. So all in all, the Petra theory might sound nice at first, but it logically and historically has no basis, and it is mostly proposed by revisionist schools of thoughts.